right. Well, we're at 10:31 and a half or so, it looks like. So um, think we're just gonna get started. So welcome everyone to our third Facilitation Friday event. Um, this is an event that sort of a 90-minute session that the Facilitated Solutions team has kind of pulled together where we spend some time just essentially sharing about the ideas and concepts and models that have shaped the work that we do in mediation and conflict management. So 2 weeks ago, some of you were likely part of the first conversation that we had around managing high conflict behaviors. And last week, we talked about some of Patrick Lencioni's tools for developing organizational health. And in particular, we were talking about how to establish clarity in uncertain times. And so we had a good conversation about some of those things. There is some material up on our website that covers off some of our conversations, so you can take a peek at that there. This week, we're tackling the idea of difficult conversations and specifically how to make friends with discomfort. But before we go there in more detail, I just thought we would cover off a few introductory remarks. I'm here again this morning with my esteemed colleague, good friend, and business partner, David Falk. So David, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm David. I'm here in Winnipeg. Sitting in my house with my two dogs. I took them for a walk this morning to hopefully have them tired out a little bit. And one is sitting on my bed with the door shut and the pup is on the main floor. I've been mediating and working the conflict resolution field since 1990. So I've had a few years of seeing a few things. And the rest you'll get to know me throughout the session.
Thanks. Yeah. So my name's Sandy Coop-Harder. I'm one of the business partners, or I am the business partner, one of the partners at Facilitated Solutions and the business manager here. I'm going to host the session today. I've been connected here at FS since 2006 and working in the mediation and conflict resolution field since 1996. And in fact, this is a true story. I first met David Falk back in 1994 when he was my university instructor in my Intro to Conflict Resolution Studies course. So,
and if memory serves me correctly, I didn't give you an A and it took you a while to forgive me.
Yeah, still I'm kind of holding on to that one. Yeah, truth be told.
If only I knew then what I know now.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Oh yeah. I would have amended my ways.
Absolutely. I sure hope so. Yeah. Anyways, David and I have another business partner, Dave Dick, who was not able to join us this morning. He might be lurking somewhere in the background here. I'm not 100% sure. But we also work with a handful of fearless associates who are really an integral part of the team here at FS. And I want to give a quick shout out to them in particular. So our workplace team, in addition to Dave, David, and I, we've got Eleanor Moore, who's there beside me in that photo, Janine Hogue-Sansregret, who is beside Eleanor, and they work with us as practitioners, and Charlene Gunter is our amazing admin support person, and she's there in between Janine and Dave.
Our executive assistant who keeps us all functioning.
Absolutely, absolutely. On the family side, the work that we do with families, we've got Janine and Eleanor again working as practitioners with us, and we also have Ron Buski there on the left-hand side and Lisa Uberdo, who is kind of in front of him there. You know, things have slowed down for us considerably since all of this quarantine, so we're not seeing as much of each other as we normally do. So we really miss, in particular, our associates these days. So yeah, these are new times, and it's been interesting. Anyways, a little bit about who we are as a firm. We've been operating together under the banner of Facilitated Solutions since 2002, and essentially we exist to equip, inspire, and help people to prevent, manage, and resolve conflict. As I already mentioned, we provide specialized conflict services in workplaces, particularly in the area of training and team development, mediation, workplace assessments, and coaching. And we also work with families in providing mediation and coaching around separation and divorce, family transitions, family business tensions, elder care concerns, estate disputes, things like that. So if you're curious to learn more about us, our team, what we do, there's lots of detailed information on our websites. So you can check us out there. In terms of housekeeping issues before we dive into the content, here's hoping 3 times is a charm. We've been trying to record our sessions here through Zoom, and honestly been struggling a bit with some of these tech details. So I can't really explain why the recording hasn't worked properly. All I know is that the common denominator is me. So this week I put David in charge of managing the recording, both because I hope that he can actually get it to work, but also because I'd really like someone else to blame if it doesn't work. Anyway, so we'll put all those links on our homepage as well. I think we're also trying to go Facebook Live for first time, so we're crossing our fingers on that one as well. If you have comments or questions during our session today, don't forget we have this chat box in the corner. We're hoping to take some time at the end of the session to get to some of those questions. If we can't get to everything, we'll do what we have in the past and compile those questions and comments and pull some resources together for you in some kind of written material. So that's the plan in terms of that piece. So, okay, we're talking today about embracing and befriending discomfort in difficult conversations. Kind of feels like making friends with the devil. David, what are we exactly talking about here?
Alrighty, well, here's the idea in a nutshell. The theory is that most of us put off having difficult conversations until we feel like having them. And the idea is if you do that, if you wait until you feel like having a difficult conversation, problem number one, you'll probably never feel like having that conversation. So you're not going to have the conversation, and that could have all kinds of impacts in terms of the nature of your relationship and putting some serious limits on your relationship, be it at work or at home. Number two, in the process of waiting to feel like having the conversation can cause some huge time delays between when an irritation, an issue, a tension moment arises, and when you finally get around to actually talking about it. And we've experienced both in our personal lives as well as within our workplace intervention work that there's kind of a bit of a statute of limitations when it comes to how long you can wait to talk or raise an issue. And the longer you wait, the more likely you're going to get increased defensiveness and pushback from the other person. And I think all of us have worked on cases at some time where somebody's received an issue in their annual performance review, where their manager has raised a conflict or concern with them that is a first time that they're hearing it, and the event happened like 9 months prior. And you wonder why the person's so pissed off, quite frankly, that their manager has held that information, denying them the opportunity to either learn and change their behavior, as opposed to repeating that thing for 9 months. And or to explain and realize that I've been judged as lacking for 9 months. And so you get all kinds of defensiveness that kicks up the longer you wait to actually have a conversation. And then lastly is that if you wait until you feel like having the conversation, there's a possibility that when you feel like having the conversation, your feelings are not the positive, I want to have a conversation to discuss and resolve, but you're feeling at a level of frustration and anger that has gotten to a point that at this point you're going for the kill, you're going for the win, you're going to crush your opponent, and you come out with too much anger and frustration as opposed to in a good kind of problem solving constructive space. And I don't know if I'm the only one who can speak from experience on this one, but parenting, and thinking particularly when my kids are younger, there's a few too many times where I let something build, and then when I actually took it up with my kids, there was too much edge coming out, too much anger, and that really sucks because then daddy has to apologize. And that kind of muddies the water in terms of the initial irritating behavior that my kid's doing that I need to talk about. But now because I raised it with too much intensity, because I sat on it for too long, now I have to own something and do the apology thing and still then pivot and get back to the issue. So I'm sure I'm the only one who can relate to that. Hey, Sandy?
Oh my gosh. Well, last week, in fact, my oldest son, who's in grade 12, gave me some feedback, and we've been quarantining together, our family here this time for about 5 weeks, and he said to me, "Mom, the only time you seem to talk to me these days is when you're mad at me about something." Ouch. So, but
Ouch.
the reality was, right, is that it's sort of true, and I know I even have the tendency, you let things build up. and then
Yeah.
speak sharply in frustration, right? And then feel bad about the exchange,
Yeah.
walk away, and realize like the thing that I was frustrated about hasn't been addressed. So so it's not working.
It's a
And
lose lose.
totally, totally. And then I was thinking about this the other day, and it struck me a bit like a lightning bolt. I think I first heard this pithy little turn of phrase from Barbara Coloroso. She's
Mm.
a American author, parenting author. I'm not sure if this was her original idea or not, but it really it stuck with me. It's this idea of connect before you direct, right?
Yeah.
It goes super far in difficult conversations, whether that's with your kids or with your direct reports. So it's, yeah, that's a huge piece, I think, in terms of just setting the stage for having those difficult conversations, regardless of who they're with. In terms of this impulse to wait to have the difficult conversation you're referring to, kind of
Yeah.
wait until you feel like it, I can totally relate to that one too. A couple of months ago, before this whole quarantine started, one of my sons told me something that had happened at school and involved a teacher and how they were handling a tricky situation that had involved a number of students and a potential disciplinary matter. And as he was sharing with me about what happened, I started to get concerned enough about what I was hearing, that I started to feel like I needed to possibly have a conversation with this teacher to both get to the bottom of what happened, to clarify the situation, because let's face it, I don't necessarily take the perspective of my 15-year-old as, the capital T truth, right?
Yeah.
But I also don't want to dismiss his take on what happened, right? So you have to balance that. Anyways, so I wanted to get clarity on this situation, and then if everything had kind of went down the way that he suggested, I probably needed to talk about my concern and give that teacher some feedback. I can tell you this, I did not want to have that conversation. I did not. I swam it around in my head every which way to see if I could justify letting it go. I slept on it to see if I would feel better the next day. I didn't. Every fiber in my body wanted to absolutely avoid this conversation. I did not want to go there. So it was super hard not to fall into that trap, right? Of kind of like, wait till I feel like having this conversation, wait till the right time when all the pieces are perfect. And I realized that even in spite of kind of having skills and training, I mean, I've worked in this field for over 20 years, right? I still don't feel like doing those difficult conversations. It's so fascinating to me. Like, we all have this, I think this inner resistance to kind of
Mm-hmm.
going to that place. So like, what's that about?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's so easy to kind of then fall into a bit of this shame of like, I should not be feeling this way because hell, I'm a professional in this field. And and I think that's part of the thing, is just recognizing that of course we're gonna feel this way. Because when you're having a difficult conversation, there's inherently something that's at risk. When you have a conversation, you could have a breakthrough. We could have a meeting of minds, a connecting of hearts. We could have a TSN turning point and leave that conversation with increase in trust and respect for each other and understanding of the issue. Like, that is possible. And the reason it's a difficult conversation is that we could also have a TSN turning point on the blooper reel, where instead of having that positive move, we have a moment of defensiveness. Despite our best intentions to be constructive, we trigger the other person, or we get triggered and our edge and our ugly starts to come out. And instead of fostering respect, there's disrespect and loss of trust between folks and things escalating. So I think the very nature of these conversations is that there is the possibility of it going one of two ways. It's not going to be exactly the same when you're done. And I think in our guts, we know that risk. And that's part of what causes us to kind of shy away at times from leaning in and kind of having the conversation.
Sure, right? Because the stakes just got heightened.
And it's the unknown, because you
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
the crystal ball of what's going to happen, right? I don't know which way it's going to go, and that anxiety about the unknown, I think, is part of what hangs us up, because we don't have the predictive abilities to guarantee the outcome.
well, that's right. And I think that's where it gets tricky, because we kind of equate this idea of discomfort with danger, right?
Yeah.
And And so yeah, like we do this risk analysis and we think, you know, like all the bells and whistles are going off internally, and that's maybe about the discomfort. And sometimes those tense moments and maybe defensiveness and potential to damage the trust in the relationship,
Yeah.
all of these things were, yeah, for sure they're part of what I was experiencing when I was thinking about approaching my son's teacher. Can be totally uncomfortable for sure, but is it really dangerous? Not
Yeah.
really, right? I mean, so our colleague Dave Dick likes to say, no one ever died of discomfort, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true. And so we have to really work at differentiating and separating out this idea of discomfort and danger.
So there's of course, a model for this. Hey, because you can take an idea, make a graphic, and I'm sure pretty much everyone on this call has at least heard, if not intuitively knows this, right? That we have these different zones of safety. You have the stuff that's in your sweet spot. That's your comfort zone. That's the easy peasy. Don't have to think about it. It doesn't create any anxiety, whether that's a conversation with someone or something that a skill that you do, it's in your zone. And then there's the discomfort zone. Yet that is different than the danger zone. And I think part of the challenge, as you said, is we kind of conflate, or we run the risk of conflating discomfort with danger and seeing those two kind of all in one. And so then if that's the case, then I think you run the risk of having what you might call a defensive mindset. And defensive mindset is where people have very small kind of comfort zones, or whatever the size of the comfort zone is, but a very little tolerance for discomfort. And lots of things set them off and trigger them. And I think back to our conversation 2 weeks ago when we were talking about high conflict conversations. I think that is one of the challenges with a lot of folks who that kind of fall into that high conflict category, is that loads of stuff set them off. Parenting, my youngest, who's deep on the autism spectrum, that sometimes can be a challenge where things can be triggering and they're so not dangerous, and yet they're going there. Just because we can't have every stick in the park on our walk, and that's his latest obsession, is picking up sticks, does not mean that the world is ending and we need to have a meltdown. So there's that kind of idea of a defensive mindset versus kind of a growth or learning mindset, where you increase your tolerance for discomfort. And when you look at the literature and the research around resilience, around sports psychology, around learning and growing in anything, it really taps into this idea of needing to learn how to befriend and embrace and become comfortable with being uncomfortable. That we have to somehow be okay with failure, with not necessarily thriving and doing everything perfectly round one. One of my favorite things to kind of do, and this of course applies beyond just what we're talking about with difficult conversations, but taking to the world of sport. Like, I kiteboard. That's my passion. I love doing it, getting on the water, waiting for another week or so for the ice to come off the big lakes. Though I saw a video literally yesterday of folks already kiting in the melted areas of the lakes. Plus, a week or two ago, they're already kiting on the floodway. So there are some folks who are like off the edge. The guys who are the best kiteboarders in the province, they wipe out more than the rest of us. And we have some folks who literally are part of Canada's elite kiteboarders who go off and win competitions, and they're going down to South Africa and entering into the big competitions globally. But they wipe out more than the rest of us. And the reason being is that they have learned how to wipe out and not die. And they've been able to separate the difference between discomfort and danger. And so they try things that they haven't yet mastered. They try a new trick and they fail. They try it again and they fail again. And it's uncomfortable, but it's not deadly. They're managing the risk. Whereas others of us, we have our 3 tricks that we have mastered, and then we don't risk the discomfort. And that's a challenge. It limits one's growth. A couple of years ago, I went on a kiteboarding trip and I had this big goal of like, I have these 3 tricks I'm going to learn. And honestly, on the 2 weeks I was down in North Carolina on this kiteboard trip, I did not even try one of those tricks once. It was so embarrassing because I went down there with the goal. And maybe it's also mindful of going, hey, given that I was not sure of my health insurance and all that good stuff, maybe there was some actual danger and risk with what I was trying, because you don't want to be reckless. But it was interesting of how the lack of willingness to fail, to wipe out, kept me from growing and learning any new trick. And it was just this fascinating kind of like microcosm going, I know this theory and here I am, I'm sucking at it. Again,
Yeah.
I'm sure this is just my issue though, right?
Of course. Yeah. Kind of like when I joined a curling league a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So I'd never curled an end in my life. I didn't even know what an end was. I did not grow up in the prairies. Okay. So, but I found this league. It was billed as a social, not super competitive league. And after a conversation with the convener, they assured me that this would be a safe place to kind of learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, and it was fascinating, right? Because I said, put me in, Skip, like put me in the least risky role. I want to try, but I needed to have some boundaries, right? Like I needed to have some sense of control. And so there I was in the lead. I had a moment of panic when I thought that sounded like a very important role, and realized, okay, no, it actually was the least risky role. But I felt like I failed many times, right? I learned slowly through many heavy rocks way across the hack line, overswept otherwise perfect throws from my teammates, right? But I did find it super challenging. We lost many games, not all because of me, I need to add, but my team was patient and we had a lot of fun, and it was a safe place to learn. And so, it is this idea of kind of like pushing yourself to a place where you can take some of those risks in a bit of a controlled, a safe, as safe as possible environment. So, yeah, I think the question is, how do we crash and not die? It's using your example. Yeah. How do we blow an end but not lose the entire game, right?
Yeah.
And so how do, like, this idea of befriending discomfort in the context of these difficult conversations, like let's go there now. Like, how do we think about more helpful ways of getting ourselves in the headspace and the heart space and
Yeah.
to be able to do that well?
So I think there's so much crossover between kind of the wisdom and research around resilience when it comes to doing this, because resilience is all about being able to bounce back from moments of compression. When life gets hard, how do you recover? And I think if you take some of the wisdom from that and apply it into difficult conversations, how do you have the resilience to have a conversation that has a difficult moment? And just before coming on the call, you're talking about a mediation that you're doing on Zoom this morning with clients and going, there were some really difficult moments in that conversation, and yet they made it through, right? That we can go there and have a hard conversation and yet find our way through, as opposed to having a moment of difficulty and having that lead to disaster. And so when it comes to resilience, there's two real big disciplines. There's a bunch of them, but the two real big ones is one, physical self-regulation, keeping your body in as calm of a state as possible, as opposed to allowing yourself to get triggered. And this is when we conflate danger with discomfort. And there's something that makes me uncomfortable, and now I fear my body, my amygdala gets triggered, and I get into fight flight mode, and I start going to self-preservation behaviors of either shutting down and or powering up and going for the win, or going for the survival move of, I'm not going to die today, and someone else might, but it's not going to be me, right? And so that the basic physicality of managing your body, of being able to breathe, of being able to take a moment and just get your RPMs coming down, so you keep yourself in a growth and learning mindset, so you stay in the discomfort zone, and being able to remind yourself of, like, this is uncomfortable, this is not deadly, I'm not actually at risk here. If you're truly not at risk, recognizing there are some situations that can be truly dangerous, but that is the minority of interpersonal conflict situations, not the average everyday workplace or family conflict goes into that kind of red zone. So part of it is that issue of being able to just physically self-regulate and keep yourself in this uncomfortable space in a calm or calm-ish state, as opposed to getting triggered. And then the second one is all the cognitive self-regulation of disciplining your thought life, which, if you're able to calm down your physicality, then you have a chance to actually manage what's going on in your head. And this is where I think there's so much wisdom that comes out of this idea of self-fulfilling prophecies, of how what you think can influence or kind of filter what you see, how you experience the life, and also kind of influence how you respond. And so there's a good old interaction cycle back in the day when I first was introduced to this in 1990, it was the conflict cycle, where we looked at beliefs and attitudes that you have about conflict. But it could be beliefs and attitudes about anything. It could be beliefs and attitudes about yourself, beliefs and attitudes about difficult conversations. And your beliefs and attitudes that you have about things in life influence what you notice and perceive. So it becomes kind of a filter that causes you to pay attention to certain things and completely ignore other things that aren't relevant, that don't fit your filter. And not only it will focus you on certain things, it will cause you to interpret things through that particular lens. So our beliefs and attitudes kind of focus us and filter what we notice and perceive. And they also influence what we see as kind of our knee-jerk reaction, our available responses to us. And how we act or respond to what we notice and perceive brings about certain consequences. And those consequences tend to reinforce our beliefs. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the one that I grew up with as a kid, I very much believe conflict's a bad thing. People involved in conflict are probably being naughty, they're being bad. And given where I was in my family and birth order and all that good stuff, and living rural where there's nobody my age for miles, and my siblings were 6 to 10 years older than me, I also grew up with this belief that in conflict, you risk social exclusion. If you speak up, if you whine, if you complain, your siblings will not let you tag along with them. But if you shut up, if you're agreeable, if you're accommodating, well, you get included in the group. And so that kind of belief, no one ever sat me down and taught me that. I just learned that by trial and error. It became its own reinforcing pattern. So I would look at situations as opportunities for social inclusion or the risk of social exclusion. And then I would react to conflict in difficult moments. And my knee-jerk reaction, the pattern that I perfected in my childhood and it's followed me into my adulthood as well, is be agreeable, be accommodating, don't speak up, don't raise the issue, or if you do, raise it super softly. And the consequences is I got to tag along with my siblings on loads of situations. It's awesome. Until it's not awesome, because then you find yourself in situations where shutting up and not speaking, well, you may be included, you might be included in something that is fundamentally wrong. And so in elementary school, when there's a bullying dynamic going on within the schoolyard, and 4 of my friends are picking on one of my other friends, I did the same move I'd done for all my life, which is I just watched it happen. I didn't actively bully, but I also didn't say, hey, this isn't cool. For 4 years, I did that. And I was included in the social group by doing nothing. But the consequences that I lived with this ongoing conflict for 4 years, my first 4 years of elementary school, and it tore me up because I knew there's injustice going on in school and I don't know what to do about it. I know it's wrong. I'm all messed up in my head because bad people do conflict. And these are my friends and I know that they're not bad people and yet what they're doing is wrong. And it was just round and around and around where I was stuck. And whenever you're in a self, perpetuating cycle, it's kind of like either you got to change your thinking or you got to change your belief or your action. Those are kind of your 2 points of influence. And for me, fortunately, I had my kind of first breakthrough in grade 4, woohoo, where I stood between my 4 friends and my other friends and went, "You got to knock down Jason. You got to knock me down first." And fortunately, I wasn't knocked down that day. But it was the first time that I actually had one of my fundamental beliefs challenged. Or where I deliberately acted incongruent with one of my fundamental beliefs. And by doing that, it started this evolution for me of going, hey, maybe I don't need to shut up in every situation. Maybe not every situation is about social inclusion. There might be other ways that I can kind of respond by being, embracing this discomfort and realizing it's not all at risk.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So let me take this back to the beach for a moment. When we're looking at, well, actually, before we go back to the beach, one of the things that I love about the self-regulation and the resilience material, when you look at the research around resilience, when they look at what causes some people to be hardy or more resilient than others, the research has surfaced 3 things, and also good researchers always find that, acronyms for folks, or they like alliteration. So the 3 C's, if you will, of hardiness is people who have an attitude, a mental posture of commitment. So what we want to explore is kind of what are some helpful beliefs and attitudes that help us befriend conflict, right? So one of them is commitment. Are you in or are you out when it comes to the relationship? Because when you are committed, you're going to be able to recover more than if you're kind of second guessing yourself all the time. So within a workplace, if you take on an acting leadership role, if in the moment of taking on that acting leadership role, something hard comes up, you have to have a difficult conversation, some discomfort. If you start going, oh, maybe I'm not cut out for this role. Oh, if you start going into that hamster wheel of self-doubting your commitment to the job and to that role, you're amplifying the discomfort. You're making it harder to actually deal with the situation at hand. Same thing within personal relationships, right? If you go and like, we're having a difficult moment, well, maybe this isn't the one. You're now taking a situation and you're amplifying it because you're now putting everything on the table, knowing that there's a time to go, we're in. So I have a client right now who's in a leadership role and she's just gone, I'm in for this year. I'm not questioning whether I'm cut out for this or not. I'm just in. And, you know, come the end of that year, there's probably going to be an important time of discernment of going, am I going to be out or am I in for another year? And likewise, talk to anyone on the family practice of our side, they'll also tell you there's a good time to divorce. And that's when you go, I'm out. But it's the in-between line when you're vacillating between am I in or am I out, that is just soul tearing, that is often the most painful, difficult time. So one is a belief around commitment. We're going to look at that in a moment. Second is a mindset around control, which is looking at a situation and going, what is within my control? And what am I focusing on? Am I focusing on those things or am I obsessing about all the things I don't have control over? Now, we're all in this global situation where there's loads that we don't have control over in terms of the virus itself, in terms of what our governments are doing, in terms of guidelines or policies, what's happening stateside. Like there's so much stuff that's out of our control. And if we over focus on things that are out of control, good luck at being resilient. And so it's really about looking at what do you have agency over and having a mindset and preoccupation with those things as opposed to being preoccupied on the other. And then lastly is a mindset around seeing the moments of challenge or these discomfort as a moment of challenge in which let's see what we can do as opposed to I'm going to die. So back to the beach for a moment. A couple of years ago, I decided I need to up my kiteboarding game. And I decided to do something that's called foil boarding. And kite foiling, and this is just an excuse for me to talk about my favorite activity, honestly, but kite foiling is this epically cool thing where your board rises completely out of the water and you're riding on this little hydrofoil, little wing, and it's so smooth. It's just this magical experience. It's also ridiculously hard to do. And so I watched all the YouTube videos about how to learn how to do this. I talked to other guys who had learned it and spent the winter, literally with a balance board in my living room, watching TV, practicing balancing, getting my balance point down, because it's kind of like riding a unicycle in the middle of the lake. It's kind of tricky to get the balance right. And so I had it all in the head. And I got out in the water my first time going foil boarding, and I had an epic fail. It just, nothing was going well. The board was flying out of the water. I started to panic. Instead of staying physically calm, self-regulating, I started to freak out. And when you start freaking out, you start doing stupid stuff. And so now I'm losing control of my kite, and my kite is yanking me this way and that way. And after about half an hour of just like going nowhere and just having a disaster in the water, I dragged my sorry ass out to the beach, and I'm beating myself up in my head going, I'm too old for this. What am I doing? I need to sell this equipment before I damage it because it's not cheap stuff, or before I hurt myself. Like I'm just so in this, am I focusing on what I have control over? No. Am I conflating discomfort with danger? Yes. Am I looking at it as a challenge? No, I've given up, right? Am I looking at it in commitment? No, I just bought this stuff. Now I want to sell it, right? Like I'm failing on all three C's, right? And this guy that lives with us, he met me on the beach, and I'm just like venting to him about all these things, right? He looks at me and goes, not everything comes easy, David. I'm like, shit, he's being my life coach. Young snot-nosed kid, like, what are you doing, right? But he was so right, like not everything comes easy. And he's like, lots of stuff comes easy for you, David. And then I took a breath and got myself grounded and stopped freaking out. And About 20 minutes later, I went back onto the water. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out onto the water and I am most likely going to suck, but I'm not going to freak out. I'm just going to calmly suck. I'm going to fail and I'm going to fail, but I'm going to learn in my. And so I went out there, and that whole summer I drank so much lake water because I'd get up on this thing and then wipe out, get up and wipe out. But I was learning how to fall without dying, without panicking, and keeping kite control. And now I can go back and forth and turn around in circles, and it's so much fun. But it's just such a critical thing of having these three mental postures. Or are you in or out commitment? Are you focused on what you have agency and control over, or are you obsessing about everything you don't have control? And newsflash, when it comes to conversations, we don't have control over the other person. We have control over our own behavior and response. And thirdly, do you see it as a challenge, or are you just wishing it would be easy or giving up before you even try? So those are these three C's and these three mindsets that I think are just so critical when it comes to navigating this difficult conversations and kind of befriending the discomfort that is inevitably that comes with the territory of a difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna kind of unpack these three C's and look at a couple more specific beliefs that kind of run with each of them. And the first one that we're going to look at is this notion of commitment. So the first C is commitment. And for that, the belief that I think is worth kind of looking at is this one here. There we go. Which is, what if I believe that the conversation is the relationship? I stole that one from a book called The Fierce Conversations. I just love it. The conversation is the relationship. What if I believe that? Or a recent Brene Brown podcast that I listened to. She was interviewing the former Surgeon General in the United States. And he articulated saying that relationship is the foundation of dialogue. And so when you think of the different kind of relationships that we have, some relationship, we can talk about anything. The conversation is a relationship. It's an easy relationship. We can have a dive in to a difficult conversation with some ease. And the next person, every conversation is just like hypersensitive and super challenging. And so the question is kind of, what kind of relationship am I wanting? And what am I committing to? So Sandy, why don't you talk a little bit about how this relates to this idea of Thomas Kilmann, and how you kind of assess some of the kind of choices around conflict strategy based on recognizing that not all relationships or all situations are exactly the same. It's not like a one size fits all.
Totally. Sure. Before I do that, just to note, I think you have us on the whiteboard there, David.
I have you on the whiteboard.
You want to flip over?
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. Excellent.
There we go.
So David's going to flip up this Thomas Kilmann conflict styles tool that we use.
Yeah.
And I really love this idea. It essentially suggests that rather than being kind of completely bound by our patterns, our proclivities, our personality, when it comes to conflict, we can choose our style in any circumstance based on the importance that we place on the particular relationship and the particular goal in question. So another way of thinking about this is the degree to which I'm trying to satisfy my own needs and concerns. So that determines my level of assertiveness. You see there on the left-hand side of the axis there, my goal or my level of assertiveness, in relation to the degree to which I'm trying to satisfy the needs and concerns of others, which determines my level of cooperativeness or the level of importance I place on the relationship. And that's across the bottom axis. So thinking back to this example that I shared a couple of minutes ago with my son's teacher, everything in my body was like down in the bottom left quadrant, avoid, 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 right? Like, because I thought it was going to be a risky conversation. There was the possibility of this tension and awkwardness. But when I thought about it carefully, took a pause and did a bit of an assessment, I realized quickly that both my goals, so my need to understand that situation and address the concern with the school, and the relationships that were at stake, so the relationships between me and that teacher, the relationship between the teacher and my son, and the larger relationship between the school and our family, they were equally important. So this assessment, kind of thinking about it this way, informed my decision and the choice that I made in terms of how to approach that conversation. So David had up on the slide earlier around the interaction cycle, this great quote from American psychologist Rollo May: human freedom involves the capacity, or here it is, real freedom is the ability to pause between a stimulus and a response, and in that pause, choose. So this idea both of pausing, so you take a moment to kind of do an internal check, and then make a choice versus just have a knee-jerk reaction of how you're gonna respond. And I find it interesting because in our work around conflict resolution and mediation, we often place a really high value on collaboration as kind of like this is the gold star in terms of how to move forward in conflict. Collaboration is the best, most desirable approach, right? With compromise kind of being an acceptable alternative in the event that all collaboration has been exhausted, right? And I think what I love about this Thomas Kilmann tool is that it suggests that responses like avoidance, accommodation, and even competition are totally appropriate postures in certain circumstances. So the school example, it demonstrates kind of how that led me to approach that in a collaborative conversation. But sometimes the goal relationship balance shifts, and you determine that the goal is actually most important and takes precedence over the need to maintain the relationship. I'm thinking of a particularly difficult conversation that my spouse had a couple of months ago after we received some very graphic and disturbing propaganda in our mailbox. And this troubled my partner. He exercised all the assertive muscles in his body when he picked up the phone to make the call over to this organization. He totally remained respectful. These things are not mutually exclusive, but he demonstrated maximum assertiveness, zero cooperativeness, right? And this did not come easy to him. Like, his factory settings are like really non-aggressive, non-assertive. He's naturally a very, very accommodating person. But here he deliberately chose to focus on the goal and no focus on the relationship, right? So I just find that an interesting way to kind of think about how to value those different responses. The key being to kind of be intentional about the choice that you're making versus just reactive in the moment, and having that knee-jerk reaction. So today, of course, for the sake of our conversation, we're going to assume that there's some level of importance in both the relationship and a corresponding level of importance in the goal, so that we're talking about that collaborative, compromising realm, right? Because that's the very ingredients, this kind of the importance of the relationship and the importance of the goal. These are the very ingredients that make a difficult conversation difficult, right? Because you're trying to maintain that balance. So when we're approaching these conversations, we really need to think about, how much do I care about this issue and my needs? And how much do I care about this person and their needs? And assuming that we do care about both of those things, then we move into kind of what feels like this difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking back a couple of years ago, getting a massage, and massage therapists really need to be paid more because they're often also therapists. Yeah. And I'm venting to my massage therapist about this difficulty that I'm having with my wife, and because she's just not accepting my perspective, and I'm trying desperately to have her agree with me. And my massage therapist said to me, David, do you want to be right or do you want to be married? And it's one of those moments of like, oh, I'm falling into the compete category. I need to win. I need to have her agree with my perspective. But is that really my goal? Like, how important is her capitulating to my point of view versus my commitment and my desire for the relationship? And that was one of these all turning points of going, oh yeah, I've got hooked into defensiveness here, and I'm starting to conflate these issues, and I'm getting out of my natural accommodating self into assertive self too much. So time to kind of shift and shape shift the issue. Another commitment practice that I think is helpful when you're thinking of this posture of commitment, am I in or am I out? If you've assessed that this is a relationship that is important, is to actually just commit to having the conversation. Make that your own personal commitment. Like I know for myself, if I have like an exercise plan, the reasons why I'm not consistent with it is that I don't schedule it. So I have these great patterns that I go in these fits and starts where I do it for a bit and then it falls out of my schedule. But if I don't schedule it, I don't do it. And even things I love, like basketball, back when we could go play, if it's not scheduled, I wouldn't do it. And on days when I don't feel like it because I'm tired and I'm grumpy and my body's sore, I still go do it because I've scheduled it. And then I go do it. I come home and I'm like, man, I'm so glad I went to the gym and played basketball. That was awesome. I think sometimes we need to take that same wisdom that we know applies to other things that are sometimes difficult in life and apply it. It's not like, and so it's just whether it's your own personal schedule of going, I'm going to have this conversation with my kid before the end of the day, or I'm going to have this conversation with my colleague before the end of the week. Like set yourself your own schedule, your own commitment, and then hold yourself to that. Or even do the other thing of pick up the phone and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Can we do that now? Or can we find another time later on this week that works for you to have that just schedule it so it happens, because otherwise you're waiting to feel like it and you just might not. So those are a couple postures around commitment. I want to move to the posture of control. And when we're looking at the posture of control, a couple other kind of beliefs, if you will, that might help with that. So here we go. See if I can avoid the whiteboard. I did. Woohoo. So what if I believed I have options and the power to choose? What if I actually believe that? Instead of like as a kid growing up going, I'm just an automatic pilot, I accommodate, I accommodate, I accommodate. Like the breakthrough for me in grade 4 was somehow realizing I don't have to accommodate. I actually have agency. I could choose to react. I can't, I don't control my peers, the kids who are beating up my buddy, but I do control my behavior and I have the power to choose a response. And so whether it's using the Thomas Kilmann grid to kind of make the choice, to assess how important is the commitment, but then once you've actually done your assessment, if it's important, then choose your response. And this is where I think a lot of us get triggered into thinking that it's kind of a binary either or choice between I can either shut up and keep the peace, or I can power up and deal with it. And when you kind of fall into that, it's either passive or aggressive as your two options. I think it's a sneaky little binary choice, because then we can use the unattractiveness of our less preferred option to justify our behavior, right? And so me growing up being pretty accommodating, I can go, well, I don't want to be a shit disturber, and so I'll just shut up. Or someone else is like, well, I'm not going to be a doormat. Someone's got to say the truth. And so they just power up and they just give a rant on Facebook or send out a harsh email, justifying it because someone has to say the truth. And in doing it, if we buy into that, there's only these two options, we miss out a whole range of kind of other ways of how could I show up and speak the truth kindly? Is there a way that I could engage with a question? I'm not confronting, I'm inquiring. Like, there's a whole other range between kind of the shutting up and powering up that if you recognize that you have power to choose, that you can then kind of tap into. And kind of going with that, when you have the power to choose, you can also realize, what am I going to do if the conversation doesn't go well? And recognize, I'm not stuck. I could choose to shut down the conversation. And I think it can increase our willingness to engage the discomfort of a difficult conversation when we realize, I have the power to choose. And that means if I'm going into the conversation and it's not going well, I can always shut it down and exit out. Here's my little eject, button that I can shut down the conversation. And when you're trying to shut down a conversation because you're concerned that you might say or do something that could be damaging to the relationship, or you just need time to collect your thoughts, or for whatever reason, the key kind of principles around exercising that discipline is, number one, it's declarative. You're not asking, hey, do you mind if we pause this conversation? because then you're giving power to the other person. They might say, well, yes, I do mind. And now you're stuck in a negotiation. So if you truly need to bail, if that's your choice that you're exercising, you declare, hey, I need a few minutes. I need to take a break from this conversation. The second thing is you need to own the need, because if you flip the need on the other person, we'll talk about this when you've calmed down. Hello, gasoline on fire. They might come back at you with a ton of energy saying, I am calm, in a very non-calm manner, right? So you need to own the need to end the conversation. And then thirdly is you have to have a commitment, going back to that first C, to pick up the conversation later. Otherwise, most likely it'll be experienced as just kind of being conflict avoidant, being passive aggressive. You raise an issue and then you run away from the conversation as soon as it gets a little bit hot. And so there's this issue, or that be declarative, name, just state it, your need for a break to kind of shut down the conversation for the moment, own the need, even if the reason you're doing it is because the other person's super intense. It's like, I need a few minutes to collect my thoughts. That's legit, right? I have another meeting I need to get to. And then lastly, this commit to pick it up at another time. So that has been, I think, just a helpful thing to have in your back pocket, because it can increase your comfort as you enter into this uncomfortable conversation, knowing that if it becomes dangerous, you got a way out. Or even be able to think about the control of like the timing. Like if you're in the driver's seat of determining when you have the conversation, now you've got all kinds of agency and control. So I think of back a few years when my oldest was in kind of a pretty prickly stage of life, and they're living on their own for the first time. And there'd be times where I'd be driving them home, and there's no conversation happening. They're in this really, I can see that they're hurting, that they're not in a good space. And I'm also anxious that if I do that, so how's it going? It could get worse, and it could cause my kid to feel trapped because they're stuck in a car, in the car ride, and that might be, kind of that sense of being trapped. And so I would at times work at managing my own reactivity. I'm breathing. I'm choosing not to take their silence and prickliness as personal rejection, even though it's hard at the time not to feel it that way. And we're listening to the radio for a little bit. And then when we're within a safe distance of their place, so that the likelihood of feeling trapped is lessened, is when I would approach with a question to check in and open up conversation space to see, are they willing and able to go there with me, or is right now actually not possible? And sometimes we end up having great conversations with the car shut off outside their place for a couple minutes. And other times, not so much. But then we weren't trapped for another 15-minute car ride because we were only a couple blocks, right? So being able to recognize, what do you have control over? You have control over your response. You have control over the timing. You have control over when you exit out of the conversation, and just recognize your agency, recognize the power that you have. Anything else that bubbles up for you on this, Sandy?
No, I mean, I think that that's a great example in terms of I think in particular, like choosing the timing piece, right? And
Yeah.
the timing and the setting. And sometimes I know I don't give that enough attention, right? And you're just in the moment and not paying attention to those things. So that really resonates with me for sure.
Yeah, there's I forget which book this comes out of. It's like maybe it's something like the Four Agreements or something like that. But this lovely quote that goes at, when you focus on your own control, right, of what you have agency over, you don't control others, you're controlling yourself, but you're also influencing others hugely. And the quote goes something like this. It goes, I create the space for other people to show up into. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I can create the kind of space for the other person to show up in. And so if I was to get up in my kid's face and use my 6'4" size and my age and all the power and privilege that I have as a cis white male to get up in their face and confront them, I'm creating a space for them to show up in that, which will either be cowering or, oh, we're going there, reactive, right?
Well, totally.
Versus being mindful of how do you set, like, what's the table you're setting for what kind of conversation? Sorry, go for it.
Well, that just makes me think of, like obviously translating that into like a performance management kind of conversation, right? Or a feedback conversation, right? Like, bringing some real intentional thought into creating that space to allow a person to be at their best, right, in that moment, recognizing that, yeah, the conversation is going to be difficult because that's just the nature of what it is that you have to talk about. But that you do have some control over how well or how poorly that will go. Not total control, but you do have some, right? You have influence, like you say. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the control front, you might even want to prior to a very difficult conversation, think about, what are my other options to this conversation? Are there other ways of meeting my needs that are independent from this particular person in this particular relationship? In the classical negotiation language, this is called your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is essentially, what are your options if this conversation particularly is not productive? And so I think back a number of years, a friend of mine was working downtown Winnipeg on one of the big towers, loved his job 3 weeks out of every month. The other week, not so much, because his boss was in from Calgary. And the nature of the way his boss run the company was very much command and control, large and in charge, which is not the way my friend ran his team in the Winnipeg office. And now it was getting to the point where now the couple of days before that week of his boss being in town are problematic, and it takes a couple of days afterwards to recover from it. So it's not only now 1 week a month, it starts becoming a week and a half or more. And so he decided, I have to lean into the discomfort. I have to have this difficult conversation. And yet he was fearful that this conversation might not go well, that it might turn into, you don't like the way I lead? Well, then what's your hurry? There's the door, right? You're fired. And so prior to the conversation, he went and checked out his options and just didn't theoretically think I could get another job. He actually went and scoped out his options and had an offer in his pocket. So he had a way of paying his mortgage, right? Of working in the field that he wanted to work in. His preference was to stay with his clients, to stay with his team, and find a way of changing the nature of a relationship with his boss. But with the power to choose, right? I can choose to work somewhere else. I'm not stuck here. And there's too many people I encounter that feel like they're stuck with the golden handcuffs. I can't mess up my pension, my benefits. I'm like, you're only as stuck as you want to be. Yeah, it might impact your pension, but what is that really worth to you in terms of the overall level of happiness? Or could you keep your pension but work in a different department, right? Find a way, if you can't affect change where you're working. And so my friend had this conversation after all this coaching and prep, right? He was keen to do it well, and it went horribly. The very thing that he feared would happen happened, despite him working at controlling the timing and the space and the posture and coming at it with grace and clarity. And it became, well, if you don't like the way I lead, well, then you're gone. And my friend was able to just kind of stay calm and collective, saying, okay, like, that's not my preference. My preference would be for us, first prize is this. But yeah, you're right. If we're not able to work on this, yeah, I can't work here. And like the next week, he was 2 floors down in the same building. And he's like, it was the best move I ever made in my life, because the culture of that workplace was more compatible with his values. Some of his clients, of course, followed him. Some of his teammates eventually followed him too, right? And so the things he lost, he gained a whole bunch of other things in the other context, right? So it's an interesting idea of focusing in on what you have control. It helps you befriend the discomfort because you're recognizing there are things within control. Me back on my kiteboard, I'm like, I don't know how to foil board, but I know how to fly a kite. I can control that. Staying grounded and staying focused on that stuff. Okay, let's move to challenge. This next belief or kind of mental posture, if you will. And so when we're looking at challenge, a couple beliefs you might want to consider that might help you befriend conflict here. So here we go. What if I believe that I am enough, that I am capable, that I'll do my best and my best is good enough? And what if I also believe that they are enough, that they are capable, that they are doing their best given their givens? Their best may be crap, but they're maybe doing the best that they can given the givens. What about that? And I think this is also connected to another interesting barrier or belief that I think a lot of us have around difficult conversations, is that we get obsessed that our conversations have to be perfect. And because we know it's not going to go perfect, we put it off, put it off, put it off. We play the conversation in our head, but we never actually have the conversation. So what if we also believe not only am I enough and I'm capable, I'm going to do my best, and my best is good enough, but I also believe that my conversations don't need to be perfect. That, now, as Hemingway says, the first draft of anything is shit. Like, just have a conversation, do your best. And if it fails, if you end up wiping out and drinking lake water, that's not the end of the world. You figured out, okay, that didn't go so great, but at least we now know what we're talking about. So I think it really kind of shape shifts the way or the energy that we come into a conversation. Instead of expecting perfection, instead of expecting it to be easy, instead of expecting that I can't. Now there's the mindset that many people get stuck in is where they have, again, the self-fulfilling prophecy of like, I can't change, I'm not enough. And it's like, well, if you believe that, guess what, you're right. I've encountered a couple coaching clients throughout our time where you're working with them, and this one guy comes to mind in particular where he's just like, I can't stop thinking about the other guy. Two different supervisors, night shift supervisor and day shift supervisor. They only overlap for like 10 minutes a day. And all shift long, the guy's thinking about the day shift supervisor, resenting him, drinking poison, hoping he'll die, right? That kind of stuff. And when I was talking to him about that, I'm going like, I get it that you obsess about him right now. In fact, he's thinking about him when he's trying to sleep, and he can't sleep because he's taking this guy to bed with him in his head. And despite that, he's like, but I can't stop doing it. I'm like, I get it, you can't right now. Do you want to learn how to evict this guy from your head? And he's like, no, I can't. I'm like, yeah, I know you can't, but do you want to learn how to? It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy, but are you willing to actually start learning? Because there's ways you can learn to discipline your mind. And you are enough. You have the capability to, I believe you can if you want to. You just don't know how to do it yet. Instead of, I don't know how to do this. It's like, yeah, I don't know how to do this yet. I don't know how to kite foil yet, but I'm capable. I'm not too old. I'll never be, NHL level, professional level, whatever, but I can, right? And so it's just this, I think, a very empowering kind of mentality to go into a difficult conversation with the belief of your own capability, with the belief of the capability of the other person, because it puts you in a posture, I think, to have a better chance of having a decent, albeit difficult conversation, as opposed to going, oh, they'll never listen to me. They're unable, or I can't. Dismissing yourself or dismissing the other person. It just takes either or both of you out of the game before you even try.
It's essentially like offering yourself and the other person grace, right?
Yeah.
In that moment. I absolutely, like, I think back actually to a conversation. Patrick Lencioni has been talking in his podcasts about this idea that if your team hasn't had online conflict, then you're not a very good team. And so, just full disclosure, we were on a team meeting about a month ago, early in the pandemic, and one of my colleagues and I had a moment online, right, in this online
Sure
forum.
did.
And you were there, and it was tough, right? It was tough, and we needed to kind of put the pause button on, and we came back to that conversation the next day, and and I think we both trusted our capacity to have that conversation together. And yet it was
still
not
tough.
perfect. It was not perfect. It was messy, and we got through it. And I think there was grace there, right? Like that we were able to kind of find some of that and trust that we will get through it, right? And I think that having that baseline of kind of trust in yourself, in your capacity, in the fact that we're all trying to do our best here, really, really goes a long way in these tough moments.
And people are doing their best given their givens, and sometimes their givens are huge.
Absolutely.
I think of a conversation I had a number of years ago with my oldest. We're out now. I'm the dog walker in our family, and then this one day, the whole family joined me for the walk. It's like, cool, walking with the family and the dogs. And for a little while, my oldest is walking up beside me, and we're talking. And they raised the topic of their bathroom. This is back when they're living at home. They'd migrated to the basement, as people do often when they age. And they raised the topic of the bathroom and said something about their non-functional bathroom. And the way that they named the bathroom as being non-functional triggered me. And some of my thoughts in my head are like, you ungrateful child, like when I was your age, I was in a family of 7 and we had one bathroom to share. It didn't even have one of those wand things for the shower. If you wanted to rinse your hair, you got to put it underneath the faucet or lean back in the bathtub, because we didn't have a shower, just a tub, right? And summertime, we had to go to an outhouse because we'd run out of well water. Like, you've got it so, so I was thinking some of that, and some of that probably leaked out, and I probably even said a little bit of that. So needless to say, the conversation ended and my kid stopped walking beside me and drifted back and walked beside my wife, Kaylin. And so I'm doing now what I always do, just walking my dogs by myself with my family trailing me, right? And we get home and my kid immediately goes down to the basement. And my wife looks at me and she goes, "Smooth move, Mr. Mediator." Right? It's like, oh man, have that thrown in your face. I'm like, what? And my little bit of defensiveness. And she's like, well, think about it. They didn't grow up in Hicksville on Vancouver Island with no running water during the summer, like blah, blah. And just gave me a couple things to kind of remind me of different context, different perspective. I'm like, oh, shoot. Yeah. Okay. And so I went downstairs after breathing, getting composure and managing what's going on in my mind, and knocked on the door, didn't wait to hear an answer. It's like, it's not locked. So I'm coming in, sit down on the edge of their bed. And I'm like, can we consider that first conversation on our walk a shitty first draft? I'm sorry, I had a hard time listening to what you were saying. Can you tell me again, what's not working with your bathroom? Because like technically the toilet was flushing, the shower had hot and cold water. It's not the taps were leaking, but it was raw drywall that had been primed and not painted, and that's hard to clean. My kid was worried about cleaning their own bathroom because it didn't have semi-gloss paint on it. My kid was concerned about the lighting because there's pot lights and there wasn't proper lights for actually being able to see yourself in a mirror. And as a teenager, wanted to see your facial complexion on the mirror and experimenting with makeup, that was not functional. And these are very solvable problems. And we had a round 2 conversation where I'm not defensive, they're not defensive. We're finding a way of talking about it that's not triggering each other. And we move to from the basement sitting on their bed to, well, let's go to the garage and look at some options for lights because my garage is full of crap. And also hearing that part of the reason why it came out for them was some energies that they felt bad because they know I'm so busy and don't want to put something else on my list of things to do. And they felt bad that they didn't know how to do electrical work. I'm like, I didn't know how to do electrical work when I was in high school. Like, are you kidding me? But it's just realizing that at least we had a shitty first draft conversation. At least we knew what we're talking about. We're talking about the bathroom. So a little bit of humility, suck up your pride and recognize that, yeah, I didn't do my best in that first conversation. Can you grace me with the second go? And I think that goes so far in terms of allowing you to get into a difficult conversation, recognizing it's not going to be a single conversation. The conversation is a relationship. The sum total of all of our conversations is our relationship. So if I want to have a relationship with my kid, I need to be able to get into these uncomfortable conversations at times and just say, okay, let's give this a second go. One more belief. So here's another one. It comes from my basketball camp days and good old fashioned sports coach basketball folks. What do they say? They say, no pain, no gain. And so what if I believed that the conversation does not need to be pain-free for me or for them, that some discomfort and defensiveness is inevitable. It's a difficult conversation. So of course there's going to be some pain and discomfort with it. And if we try to wait until we figured out how to do it pain-free, we're going to wait too long. And it's not about just going, well, hell, there's going to be pain, so screw it. I'm just going to go and say what I need to say. Well, that's going for aggression. That's flipping and choosing the other binary. But just recognizing that this mid-range between being passive and being aggressive is not going to be pain-free, but it's not necessarily dangerous pain. There is actually some importance of recognizing and respecting the grind, that when you're learning something, you're going to suffer for a while. It's not going to necessarily just be easy peasy. That I have to spend a whole summer wiping out and drinking lake water until I get it going with my foil board. that we're going to have to grind it out and have some difficult conversations on the Zoom platform until we're like, okay, we've now understood each other. We got a good idea now. We're able to move forward. So I think there's something just really quite liberating from that, of recognizing we're not going for pain free. That's not the goal. I don't want to be hurtful, but it's going to have some pain, and that's okay. And I think even normalizing that for ourselves or for the person, like if you're going into the workplace context of giving feedback, oh man, giving feedback can be so painful at times, especially if the person's not aware that what they're doing isn't what you're expecting, because you're moving them from being unaware, unconsciously incompetent, being this painful moment of realization that they're not as good as they thought they were, and they become aware or conscious. That's this lovely classic hierarchy or stages of learning where we move through these steps. And when we're moving through the steps, this move of moving here, of raising a person's awareness, moving them from unconsciously incompetent to be consciously incompetent, is often very painful. And you get all kinds of defensiveness, and people want to go back to, no, it's fine, right? And just being able to normalize and saying, hey, I get it, that's difficult to hear, that you're not doing it the way I was expecting. That's okay. But at least now you know. And sometimes I think because we want them not to hurt, we overtalk. And we think that by talking more and more and more, we can talk them out of their pain. And they should now feel grateful that we've given them this feedback, as opposed to recognizing it's going to hurt a little bit. So let's have the conversation, and then let's get over it and end the conversation, instead of picking at it, poking at it, and hoping that they'd say, oh, I'm happy now that you've given me this feedback. Like, get the feedback. And then connect later of going, hey, and normalizing that we're good. It's not like I think you're a bad person, an incompetent person, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely. I've even seen it in moments where we've been working with clients on team development stuff, where a leader will deliver some difficult feedback and then actually walk it back, because they're trying to rescue the person from the pain. Right. And it's fundamentally not helpful, right? Because it's sending a super mixed message. And so this idea of needing to kind of this compulsion, right, to try to rescue people from these tough moments, right, is notice it, but don't be afraid of that. It's leaning into that discomfort moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And go back to Barbara Coloroso that you referenced in the beginning. Connect before you direct. I think that's a helpful thing. You want to connect, whether it is, hey, as simple as saying, hey, how's it going? And checking in with the person, and then get into the difficult conversation, but then end it and not like overcook the conversation, hoping that they'll be somehow feeling wonderful by the time you're done. But then if we add another piece to Colorosa's statement, then find a moment to connect later, to normalize the relationship, that in the big picture, we're good. This is feedback pieces, just this one thing. So I find that helpful. And with this idea also around the belief that most people are trying to do their best, I think is a helpful one to kind of hold on to, right? Like, I'm trying to do my best, you're trying to do the best. And if I actually hold that to be true, that will influence when I come into a conversation, not necessarily leading with corrective and assuming that the person's meaning to be screwing up or meaning to be hurtful to me or meaning whatever, of being able to suspend my judgment instead of assuming that they have negative motivations behind the email that I found offensive and coming up and confronting them about being disrespectful, that I need to remind myself that, hey, they're probably just trying to do their best. Their best might suck. Their email might have been very disrespectful or felt dismissive, yet they might not have meant it as being dismissive. They might have, but maybe not. I don't know. And so this process that we've taught over and over to clients over the years is helping people kind of suspend their judgment when they're feeling slighted by someone else. And instead of assuming the person meant to slight them or offend them, just acknowledge that maybe it is, but maybe not. You don't know. Extend the benefit of doubt. Not meaning that, oh, I sure think they meant well by it, but just, I don't know what they meant by it. And then ask yourself, does this really matter? Now do the little Thomas Kilmann assessment. How important is it for me to check this thing out? How important is the relationship? And if it is, I need to come and approach that person and name the thing that they said or did. I'll call the person on the email and say, hey, I got this email from you. And instead of confronting them about the impact of their email, instead of leading with that, lead with a question. And this is just about connecting at the front end. And you're asking them to clarify, hey, I got this email from you. I wasn't sure what you meant. And the marvelous thing is that when you open up a conversation, you're getting into the discomfort without a challenge or a rebuke, you're opening into that discomfort with a question. It's quite safe. It's quite low risk because you're just asking for clarity at this point. And you're not labeling their email as being inappropriate. You're just asking them to clarify their email. So there's very little for the person to be getting defensive and upset about. And sometimes when you ask for clarity, you get clarity. They say, oh, this is what I meant. And you realize, oh boy, given the givens, I took whatever they said in that email, I ran it through my personal filter, my baggage, and I took offense where no offense was meant. And that's kind of on me and my own kind of stuff that I need to be working on. And it's like, I'm so glad I asked the question because now we're good. Or I might even be able to go from there and say, you know what, that's super helpful to hear that. I need to let you know that how you worded your email, it didn't come across that way to me. So in the future, you might want, so there's even a coaching opportunity where you can give a person a heads up of how to communicate more effectively with you. But that's such a gracious thing to extend to people, the opportunity to clarify their intention.
Well, it can be so unbelievably, like it can shift the ground, right?
Yeah.
That's partly what happened in my conversation with the teacher that I was referring to earlier.
Yeah.
So we did have that conversation, and surprise, surprise, what the teacher explained went down was a little different than how my 15-year-old described it, right?
Yeah.
And so if I had gone in there with kind of armed with the truth as
confronting energy,
absolutely, right? There I would have been met with absolutely defensive reaction, right from the get-go, and we would have had a very, very different conversation.
Yeah, you might have pushed the conversation from being uncomfortable into the danger category.
Totally.
Self-fulfilling
right?
prophecy. Boom, there you go.
Yeah. So opening it up, saying, hey, I want to hear kind of your perspective of what happened in this situation. And then I was able to go, oh, that's interesting.
That's new information.
This is how it was relayed to me. And so let's figure out where the gaps are, how we missed each other, and what actually happened. Like where do we begin to build kind of a shared story of the events? And so
it's really about leading with a question and then following up, if necessary, by letting them know of, hey, what you said, this is how it impacted my kid, or this is how it impacted me, or we often say we educate people on the impact, whether it's personal impact, relational impact, or operational impact. This is what you did and how it impacted the business workflow, right? So sometimes you don't even need to go here, because the second that you say, hey, I got this email, I'm not sure what you meant by it, just the process of putting a spotlight on the other person's behavior raises their awareness, and they are now instantly aware of, oh crap, I screwed up, and they own it. And they, in that moment, they're like, you know what? Yeah, I was way too exhausted at the end of the day when I banged that out, and that email has way too much tone. I am sorry. And they pull it back. And that's great. I don't need to go through a whole thing of saying, oh yeah, because what you said really offended me. They've already apologized. They've already owned it. And it's time to just move on and kind of deal with it. So I find this is just when we have this belief that people are trying to do their best they can given the givens. And that sometimes given the givens, what they do sucks, but they're trying their best, as opposed to assuming, well, they did this because they don't like me, assuming negative intent, assuming negative agenda, that it's in your best interest to actually extend the benefit of the doubt so you can deal with what it actually is, as opposed to acting out of your conspiracy theory, treating people as suspiciously, because when you do that, you run the risk of creating the self-fulfilling prophecy where the very thing that you fear, you treat them that way, you see them that way, you act that way, and guess what? They start falling in line and behaving accordingly. Yeah. And same thing when we're doing kind of teaching people around feedback. It's this idea, it's not just checking in, but maybe you've already clarified things, and now given your role in leadership, you actually have to give corrective feedback, which can be one of those uncomfortable moments, is just simply, you walk up and make the approach, but then shut up for a moment, give a pause. Because sometimes with the power of your position, just showing up and saying, hey, how's it going? The person at that point goes, oh, crappy, I totally screwed up something this morning. And they confess their crime, which means almost all your work as a leader is done. they're already aware they screwed up. They've taken ownership for it. And all you have to do is kind of jump down to saying, okay, so what's your plan? What do you need from me? And making sure that we've got a plan to recover from it. So, but if you don't do that, if you don't approach and then pause, you're not giving them a chance to engage with you in that conversation. But not everyone, of course, jumps in right away. So you do have to be prepared to go the next step and say, hey, I heard about this. And you name the thing that you're concerned about. But then again, give a pause at that moment, because at that moment, they might go, oh, okay, my boss knows what happened. And in this moment, before you describe impact or expectations, you're giving them a bit of space for them to engage a conversation, explain their take of it, whether they're apologetic or whether they have an explanation or whatever, right? And that can, again, allow them to engage a conversation with you sooner, instead of just doing the dump and go conflict resolution method where you come and you dump all your critique on a person, then vroom, drive away, which sucks when you're on the receiving end. So it's just this idea of incrementally coming in. But part of what enables you to do this is, again, I think rooted in some of these fundamental beliefs, that conflict's not the problem, that people are trying to do the best they can. In fact, if we have conflict plus trust, that ultimately equals, as Lencioni talks about, that is the pursuit of the best idea. Because conflict's not the problem. Differences plus tension is just that. If we don't have trust, though, well, now we've got politics. And we have the pursuit of, I'm trying to win over the other individual because I don't trust you. And we're not working with good intent to, mutually benefit or for mutual concern.
Absolutely. 100%, David. So I'm conscious of the time. We're about 8 minutes to wrap here. And before we kind of shift into kind of some closing summary comments, I just want to give an opportunity, if anyone has any questions or comments that they want to kind of stick in the chat box. We're happy to kind of engage you. And if there's something rising up for you as you've been listening here, this is part of the challenge of a sort of unidirectional platform. But if there is something that you'd like to comment on, or a question that you have, certainly feel free to drop it in the chat box.
While we're waiting for any chat box stuff, one last slide. And that's this, one last belief around the challenge. And that is, what if I believed in hope? What if I believe that reconciliation or making things right is possible? Not guaranteed, but possible. What if I actually believe people can change? Because if you believe people can't change, you're going to see them that way, you're going to treat them that way, and it's probably going to be that way. So it's not a guarantee that reconciliation is going to happen. It's not a guarantee that people are going to change. But what if you believe that? Because that can be really quite something. And my massage therapist has this on her wall, which I found an interesting quote. And it's, expect nothing, be grateful for everything. Because if I'm too much of going, I hope for reconciliation, I believe people can change, and I now expect them to change, and now I'm frustrated that they're not changing, we start getting into a increased resentment and hostility, as opposed to, I believe it is possible for people to change, and I'm also not running at it with that expectation that they will. I'm not expecting it, but I'm going to be grateful for everything, and being in that positive gratitude, so you can see the good in a highly imperfect world that we live in the highly imperfect relationships that we're all part of, and be able to kind of build and leverage on that.
Yeah. Gratitude. Absolutely. So, okay. So, just maybe in closing here, thinking about quick recap. I think certainly this is true for me. Many of us put off having difficult conversations until we feel like it. And that I think, we've determined here is dangerous, right? Like there's several reasons why that's maybe not advised. We may never feel like it, quite likely. The process of waiting until we feel like it can actually cause a significant delay between whatever the event was and the debrief of that event. And that can actually create this kind of dynamic where the issues are sort of stale dated or they're collected, right? And by the time we actually feel kind of do that, we do feel like it's coming from a place of frustration and anger, and we're lashing out after an accumulation and a buildup. And then it feels more like a fight than a conversation. And so that's part of the challenge of sort of the I'm going to put off this difficult conversation because it can get you into trouble in all kinds of ways.
And so to befriend difficult conversations, to befriend discomfort, it's about recognizing and differentiating between discomfort and danger. Mm-hmm. And when you enter into the discomfort, manage your body physically, keep yourself physically grounded. And if you need, go online. There's loads of different grounding strategies, from breathing and self-regulation techniques that you can tap into. And so practice that. And then also discipline your thinking, self-regulate your cognition, what's going on in your thoughts, discipline your thoughts. And particularly thinking around these three kind of mental postures of commitment. Am I in this relationship or am I not in this relationship? And if I'm in, well, then I've got to engage some of these difficult moments if I want a relationship that has that kind of ceiling. About control, looking at what do I have control over? What do I have agency on? And focus on those things, as opposed to being obsessed about, other people and things you don't control in the situation. And then this third posture of challenge, instead of going, I'm going to die or I can't, recognizing that, okay, this might be hard. This might take some effort. Let's see what I can do. And kind of respecting the grind, that discomfort, that learning, that growth comes often from the grind. This is where those who are gamers, I think, have learned something, because they will grind out a level and they'll go and fail and fail and fail and learn, though, because it's through the grind that if we have it with a learning posture, if we manage our irritation, frustration, then we can learn things and go, okay, I figured it out. Now I move to the next level. And when you take that wisdom from gaming and apply it into human relations, well, then just imagine what else is possible. Closing story, my dad, when actually he's probably around my age, in his 50s, he wiped out skiing, injured his shoulder, and didn't do anything about it for a year, and ended up with like bursitis and stuff like that, lesions in his shoulder. So he couldn't raise his arm past kind of just shoulder height. Eventually he went to a physiotherapist, and the physiotherapist got him going on exercises. And one of the exercises was getting a rope up in the basement over a rafter and doing this arm movements, just getting the motion back and doing the grind, repetitive, doing the work, uncomfortable, feeling some pain, but just working it. My grandfather came over and saw my dad doing this, and his good German accent said, "Was ist das?" Right? And my dad explained to him, well, I injured my shoulder a year ago. I haven't been able to move it. And my grandpa was in his 80s at the time. He went, I haven't been able to move my arm past here for like over a decade. So what did my grandpa do? He went home, got a rope, put it up in his basement, and started doing arm exercises. And into his 90s, he had full range of motion in his shoulder. He got it back. And the story gets better. My grandmother saw my grandpa in the basement, and she's like, "Was ist das?" Right? And she's down there now with the rope doing things, doing arm motions, right? And so it's one of those things that when you look at what else is possible, when you look at what's within your control, see it as a challenge and engage and kind of respect the grind, engage and befriend the discomfort, things can change. It's going to be easy? No. Is it rewarding though? Hell yeah. When you have a second or third try conversation and you finally connect with your kid, or when I moved from needing to be right to realizing, actually, I want to be married, and finding a way of engaging that conversation. It's not like I just went into accommodation mode, but engaging the conversation with better energy, so that we could do that well. I think it's just huge. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Next week, the topic that we're going to be hitting is as follows. We are going for the topic of gossip, managing the chatter, given that these days when virtual teams and all the unknowns that are going on, there's loads of rumors and conspiracy theories and anxieties going around. And so we want to dive into that and hit it straight on of how do you kind of gag gossip and manage the conspiracy theories and deal with the chatter. So that's what's coming down the pipe. Closing word to you, Sandy?
No, just a big thank you. If you have any ideas or suggestions for us in terms of future topics, we're super open to thinking about what's relevant to you. So happy to take those. You can email me any feedback or ideas that you have. If you aren't already on our distribution list, there's a sign up button on our website that's pretty easy to find. So feel free to go there, and that will give you information about all of our kind of future activities in this regard. So many thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate seeing you all here, and hope to see you next week.
Yeah, take care. Have a good week.
Bye, everyone.